Hiss, click, hiss, click. That was the only sound in the suffocating darkness of my hospital room. The rhythmic, mechanical breathing of the ventilator shoving air into my paralyzed lungs. Then came another sound. Scritch-scratch. It was the sound of an expensive Mont Blanc pen sliding across a piece of paper on a medical clipboard. The sound of my husband signing my death warrant. "Don't blame me, Elena," David whispered, leaning over the bed. His hot, stale breath hit my cheek, smelling of stale coffee and expensive cologne. "You wouldn't want to live like a vegetable anyway. I'm doing you a favor." I felt his soft, manicured hand reach out and grip the thick plastic plug of my life support machine. My heart screamed inside my chest. I wanted to bolt upright. I wanted to grab him by the throat and crush his windpipe, but I couldn't move a single muscle. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't even twitch my pinky finger. I was trapped inside a useless, frozen body, fully conscious, listening to the man I loved prepare to murder me in cold blood. He was going to pull that plug, cash out a $400,000 military life insurance policy, sell off my family's land, and walk away a rich, grieving widower. He thought he had committed the absolute perfect crime. He thought he was dealing with a helpless victim. He made one catastrophic miscalculation. He forgot he married a United States Air Force pararescueman, and I was about to drop a nuclear bomb on his pathetic existence. But to understand exactly how I ripped my husband's entire world apart and watched him beg for mercy, we have to rewind the clock. I am Captain Elena Rostova. I am a combat rescue officer for the USAF Pararescue, the PJs. Our motto is, that others may live. I have pulled down fighter pilots out of burning wreckage in Afghanistan and dragged civilians out of raging flash floods. I am trained to spot ambushes in hostile territory, but somehow I completely missed the hostile threat sleeping right next to me in my own bed. Veillez-vous! The base sirens at Eglin Air Force Base were screaming, cutting violently through the suffocating Florida humidity. A Category 4 hurricane was churning over the Gulf of Mexico, a massive black swirl of destruction about to slam into the coastline. Inside the staging hangar, chaos reigned. I was aggressively yanking the Velcro straps of my tactical vest, checking my carabiners, and double-checking my trauma kit. My HH-60G Pave Hawk helicopter was spooling up on the tarmac. But before you fly into the eye of a meat grinder, the military bureaucracy demands its due. Pre-deployment protocols. I sat at a cold metal desk while a JAG clerk slid a thick stack of legal documents toward me. Durable power of attorney and medical proxy. Standard procedure. If I went down, somebody had to make the calls. I grabbed a pen and forcefully scribbled my signature on the dotted lines, legally handing my finances, my property, and my medical decisions over to my husband, David Trent. Right on cue, the double doors of the hangar swung open. In walked David. He looked like a Miami Vice reject, wearing a custom-tailored Italian Navy suit and $800 loafers, looking completely absurd in the middle of a frantic military staging area. Master Sergeant Jax, my hulking, scar-faced team lead, walked past us carrying a load of gear. The second David saw Jax, he threw his arms around my neck, pressing a dramatic kiss to my forehead. "Come home, safe to me, baby. I don't know what I'd do without you," David announced, his voice loud enough to echo off the hangar walls. Jax gave a respectful nod and stepped out into the rain. Clack. The heavy metal door shut behind him. The instant the door closed, David's loving smile snapped off like a light switch. He stepped back in disgust, wiping a stray drop of rainwater off his silk lapel. "Do you really have to do this right now?" he snapped, angrily checking his gold Rolex. "I have a massive showing in South Beach in 3 hours. There's a Cat 4 storm burying a city, David." "People are dying," I said, grabbing my tactical helmet off the table. "Yeah, well, my creditors are burying me," he hissed, slamming a leather folder down onto the metal desk. "Just sign the papers for the Fredericksburg Ranch, Elena. $2 million is just sitting in the Texas dirt. We sell it to the developers today, and we're set. I need that cash, Elena. I slammed my locker shut. Bang. I stepped directly into his personal space, forcing him to look up at me. That land belonged to my grandfather. It's not a casino chip to cover your bad real estate bets. The answer is no. Now get out of my way. I shoved past him, marching straight out to the flight line. I didn't look back. If I had, I might have seen the absolute, venomous hatred burning in his eyes. 10 minutes later, I was hanging out the side door of the pave hawk. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The twin rotors chopped violently through the torrential rain. The sky was bruised, purple, and pitch black. The wind howled, violently shaking the 22,000-pound chopper like a cheap toy. Below us, the storm surge had already swallowed an entire coastal neighborhood. Jax yelled over the comms, pointing down at the churning brown water. A family of 3 was huddled on a crumbling shingle roof. The water was rushing violently up to their waists, threatening to sweep them away at any second. I hooked my harness into the steel hoist. Going down! I screamed into my mic. I rappelled out into the abyss. The freezing rain felt like flying broken glass against my face. I hit the roof hard, my combat boots slipping on the wet, mossy shingles. I scrambled toward the family. I grabbed the mother first, hooking her into the rescue strap. Up she went. Then I strapped in the father. Up he went. Only the 7-year-old boy was left. He was sobbing hysterically, shivering, his tiny hands gripping the brick chimney for dear life. I lunged forward, wrapping my arms tight around his small torso. "I got you, buddy. Hold on to me," I yelled, hooking his harness directly to my chest rig. Over the deafening roar of the hurricane, I heard a sound that made my blood run ice cold. Grr snap. I whipped my head around. A massive wooden utility pole, snapped clean at the base by a 130 mph gust, was free-falling through the air, aiming directly for our heads. There was no time to unhook, no time to jump into the floodwaters. My training took over. I spun around, violently shoving the boy into the narrow, protected gap behind the brick chimney, throwing my entire body over him as a human shield. The impact was like getting hit by a runaway freight train. The heavy timber smashed into my spine. My skull slammed forward into the concrete edge of the chimney. A blinding flash of white light exploded behind my eyes, followed by a sickening, wet crunch. And then, absolute, suffocating darkness. I didn't wake up all at once. It was a slow, agonizing crawl out of a pitch-black grave. First came the smell. Not the sterile, sharp, reassuring scent of an Air Force medical trauma unit. It was the pungent, nauseating stench of industrial bleach trying to mask the smell of stale urine and rotting linoleum. I tried to open my eyes. My eyelids felt like they were bolted to my cheekbones. Forcing every ounce of willpower I had, I managed to crack them open just a fraction of a millimeter. My blurred vision slowly adjusted. Peeling yellow wallpaper, water stains shaped like bruised lungs on the ceiling, a flickering fluorescent tube buzzing over my head like an angry hornet. Where was Jax? Where was the base hospital? I tried to turn my head. Nothing. I tried to clench my fists. Nothing. A cold, razor-sharp spike of pure panic drove itself into my chest. But I couldn't even gasp. A plastic tube was jammed down my throat, and a machine next to me was doing the breathing for me. Hiss, click, hiss, click. Locked-in syndrome. The medical term floated up from the depths of my combat trauma training. My brain had fully rebooted. I was 100% cognitively aware, but the neurological bridge to my muscles was completely severed. I was a ghost trapped inside a paralyzed meat suit. Suddenly, the heavy, unoiled hinge of my door whined open. Click-clack, click-clack. Expensive Italian leather soles hitting cheap vinyl flooring. 2 sets of them. Through the tiny slit of my eyelashes, I saw David. He didn't look like the polished Miami real estate broker who had kissed my forehead at Eglin. His custom suit was severely wrinkled. His tie was ripped loose, and his face was covered in a greasy layer of sweat. Beside him stood Lucas, his older brother. Lucas was a bottom-feeding personal injury lawyer who operated out of a strip mall in Hialeah. He had the beady eyes of a scavenger and always smelled like cheap cigars and absolute desperation. David paced the cramped, suffocating room like a caged rat. He violently kicked the metal leg of my bed. Clang! The vibration shot straight up my shattered spine, but my face remained a frozen, lifeless mask. "Look at her, Luke." David spat, his voice trembling with a sickening mix of terror and disgust. "She's just laying there. It's been weeks. How much longer is this going to take? The meter is running, and I am completely out of time." Lucas casually leaned against the stained wall, pulling a silver cutter from his pocket and snipping the end of a cigar. "Snip. Relax, Dave. You're holding the golden ticket, that durable power of attorney she signed before the storm. It gives you absolute, uncontested control." David grabbed handfuls of his own hair, yanking at the roots. "Total control doesn't pay off Hector's guys. They cornered me at the dog track yesterday. Luke, 500 grand. $500,000 in underground sports betting. If I don't have that money by the weekend, they're going to start sending me my own fingers in the mail." David stopped pacing and leaned over my bed. Pure, unadulterated hatred contorted his handsome face. "I used the POA to yank her out of the military hospital and dumped her in this cheap back alley hospice to save a few grand, but she's still draining me dry. She's taking too damn long to die. My husband had pulled me out of a state-of-the-art military facility and left me to rot in this shithole, just to save a few bucks." Lucas chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that made my skin crawl. He stepped up to the bed, tapping a thick manila folder aggressively against my mattress. "You're thinking too small, little brother," Lucas said, his eyes practically gleaming in the harsh fluorescent light. "Here's the play. This Friday, that corporate developer is ready to close on her Texas ranch. All you have to do is forge her signature on the deed transfer. The POA makes it perfectly legal for you to act as her proxy. They wire 300 grand as a non-refundable deposit directly into your account by noon." David stopped breathing for a second. His eyes widened. 300. That gets Hector off my back. But what about the rest of the debt? Lucas leaned in closer, his cheap musk cologne invading my lungs. "Once the wire clears on Friday, you drive right back to this dump. You take out the medical proxy. You sign the DNR do not resuscitate. You tell the rent-a-doc outside to pull the plug." David stared blankly at my face. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. "Once she flatlines," Lucas continued, a greedy, sinister smirk twisting his lips, "Uncle Sam cuts you a check for her SGLI. $400,000 of tax-free military life insurance. You pay off the cartel, and we buy that 60-foot yacht in Boca Raton." A primal, volcanic rage detonated inside my chest. It wasn't just betrayal. It was an execution. They were casually scheduling my murder for a Friday afternoon to cover a gambling debt. Beep, 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 beep. The heart monitor beside my bed suddenly spiked, the pitch accelerating into a frantic, high-pitched scream as my adrenaline redlined. David violently jumped back, staring at the glowing green screen in sheer panic. What the hell was that? Is she waking up? Luke? Is she hearing us? Lucas aggressively shoved him aside, squinting at the erratic lines on the monitor. "Control it, Elena." My PJ training violently hijacked my autonomic nervous system. Tactical combat breathing. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Hold for 4. I visualized the freezing rain of the hurricane. I visualized the absolute zero of a high-altitude jump. I forced the raging, boiling fire in my blood to turn into solid ice. Beep, beep, beep. The green line on the monitor slowly dropped, returning to a steady, rhythmic, pathetic crawl. Lucas exhaled a heavy breath, waving his hand dismissively at the machine. "It's just a medical glitch, Dave. Look at her eyes. Nobody's home. She's brain dead. A vegetable." Friday, we pull the plug, cash out, and walk away clean. They turned their backs on me. Click-clack, click-clack. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing me back in the darkness. They thought I was a vegetable. They thought I was just a helpless piece of meat waiting for the slaughter. But lying there, staring through the slits of my eyelids at the peeling yellow paint, the victim inside me died completely. I was a United States Air Force pararescue man, trapped behind enemy lines, and I was going to burn their entire world to the ground. The heavy click-clack of their expensive leather shoes faded down the linoleum hallway, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence of that miserable room. They thought I was a vegetable, a piece of decaying meat waiting for the slaughter. But behind my frozen face, the tactical machinery of an Air Force pararescueman had just clicked into high gear. I just needed a comms line. Night fell, painting the water-stained ceiling in sickly orange hues from the street lamp outside. The door pushed open with a soft squeak. It wasn't the usual indifferent, minimum-wage orderly who tossed me around like a sack of flour. This woman moved differently. Her steps were measured, efficient, completely absent of the dragging shuffle that plagued this facility. Her name tag read Clara. She approached the bed, snapping on a pair of latex gloves. As she reached for a fresh IV bag in the flimsy plastic wardrobe, she froze. Her hand hovered over the bottom shelf. Stuffed unceremoniously in the corner were my OCPs, my operational camouflage pattern uniform, the Velcro unit patches, still clinging to the sleeves. Clara stared at the camouflage fabric. A heavy, complex shadow crossed her face. She turned back to me, her eyes locking onto my unresponsive features. There was no pity in her gaze. It was something sharper. Respect. Anger. The unmistakable recognition of a fellow service member, realizing a sister-in-arms had been discarded in a landfill. She soaked a clean washcloth in warm water and gently dragged it across my cheek. "You don't belong in a place like this, Captain," she whispered, her voice tightening. "I did a tour at Bagram. Air Force medic. I know what you PJs do. You deserve better than this." An Air Force medic. Adrenaline surged, hot and sharp, right into my chest. This was it. My extraction team of one. As the warm cloth passed over my brow, I summoned every microscopic ounce of willpower I possessed. I focused the entirety of my conscious mind on the tiny, microscopic muscles around my eyes. They felt like rusty hinges buried under concrete. Fight? I forced my eyelids down. A quick snap, then another, then a third. Dot, dot, dot. My corneas burned. The effort was excruciating, like deadlifting 500 pounds with my face. I held the next blink, squeezing it shut for a grueling 3 seconds. Dash, 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 then 3 more quick snaps. Clara's hand froze mid-wipe. She stared at my face. At first, the clinical side of her brain took over. She reached for her penlight, assuming it was a neurological spasm, a random misfire of a dying brain. But as the beam hit my pupils, I forced the sequence again, ignoring the searing pain in my optical nerves. Dote, dote, dote. Dash, dash, dash. Dote, dote, dote. The penlight clicked off. The civilian nurse vanished, and the combat medic snapped to attention. The air in the room instantly changed. Clara grabbed a disposable paper towel and a blue ballpoint pen from her scrub pocket. She leaned in so close, I could smell the peppermint gum on her breath. "Do it again, ma'am," she ordered, her voice dropping to an urgent, tactical whisper. "I'm reading you. CRLJRX." Clara's eyes went wide as she transcribed the letters. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer empty comforts. She simply folded the paper towel, shoved it into her pocket, and gave me a sharp, definitive nod. Copy that, Captain. Reinforcements are coming. The next morning, the door didn't squeak open. It was practically shoved off its hinges. Master Sergeant Jax filled the doorframe. He wasn't in his tactical kit. He wore a faded gray t-shirt and denim, but he looked like a walking kinetic strike. His eyes, usually calm under heavy enemy fire, were bloodshot and completely feral as they scanned the peeling wallpaper, the rusty bed rails, and finally, me. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides. I heard the sickening crunch of his jaw clenching as he took in my atrophied frame. He didn't speak. He just reached out and wrapped his massive, calloused hand around my limp right hand. Through the night, Clara had been secretly working my arm. Aggressive, painful, passive range of motion stretches, forcibly breaking down the stiffness in my tendons. Because of her, I had ammunition. I focused on my right index finger resting against Jax's rough palm. I pressed down. A weak, trembling tap. Jax went completely still. He looked down at our hands, then up at my half-open eyes. Dap, 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 dap. I was spelling out David's entire playbook. The debt, the Texas ranch, Friday's execution date. I felt Jax's pulse hammering through his skin as he absorbed the intel. A dark, terrifying calm settled over his scarred face. The kind of calm that precedes a massive shockwave. Message received. Boss, Jax rumbled, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. I'm pulling the trigger. 48 hours later. Wednesday, 2 a.m. The security camera in the hallway outside my room suddenly went blind, courtesy of a strip of black gaffer tape applied by a man who breached hostile compounds for a living. The door opened like a whisper. Jax slipped inside, followed immediately by 2 figures in crisp, dark suits. One carried a heavy leather briefcase. The other clutched a brass stamping tool, a JAG officer, and a military notary. Captain Rostova, the JAG officer whispered, stepping up to the bed. His face was sharp, clinical, and completely devoid of emotion. He pulled a thick document from his briefcase and laid it on the rolling tray. This is a full, irrevocable revocation of power of attorney. The moment your ink hits this page, your husband is legally castrated. Your medical directives and assets fall under the immediate, unyielding protection of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Clara, who had taken the graveyard shift just for this, stepped forward. She gently elevated my right arm, sliding a thick gel pad under my elbow to give me leverage. Jax unhooked a tactical pen from his pocket and slid it between my stiff, trembling fingers. He didn't guide my hand. He just braced my wrist, providing the structural support I needed. The rest was up to me. I stared at the signature line. This wasn't just a legal document. It was a weapon. I gritted my teeth, pouring every drop of rage, every second of being trapped in the dark, straight into my fingertips. The pen hit the paper. It was agonizing. The ink dragged across the page in a jagged, violent scrawl. Rostova. I let the pen drop. The notary stepped up, checked my vitals to confirm cognitive presence, and slammed his heavy brass stamp down on the page. Thud, the sound of absolute legal authority. Jax crossed his massive arms, his biceps straining against his shirt. All right, it's done, he growled, pacing the small room like a caged tiger. I'm going to his condo right now. I'm going to drag that parasitic piece of garbage out by his hair and toss him to the MPs for elder abuse and fraud. No, you are not, Master Sergeant. The JAG officer interrupted, his voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. Jax stopped, glaring at the lawyer. He's actively plotting to murder a U.S. military officer. And if you kick his door in tonight, what do we have? The JAG officer adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, looking down at the paperwork. Misuse of a medical proxy. Simple fraud. Maybe a few misdemeanors. His brother is a slimy defense attorney. They'll post bail by breakfast, and they'll tie us up in civil court for a decade. The lawyer stepped closer to my bed, his eyes locking onto mine. He wasn't a soldier, but he possessed a terrifying, ruthless kind of lethality. "We don't want to just stop him, Captain. We want to bury him under a federal penitentiary," the JAG murmured, a cold smile touching the corners of his mouth. Friday morning, David will log onto a computer and electronically transfer a deed of sale for a property in Texas, routing $300,000 to a bank in Florida. He will use a power of attorney that, as of 2 minutes ago, is completely dead. Jax's eyes narrowed as he caught on. Interstate commerce. Exactly. The JAG nodded smoothly. The second that money crosses state lines, he commits federal wire fraud. That brings the FBI and the Treasury into the game. It's a 20-year mandatory minimum. The lawyer leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. And on Friday afternoon, when he walks into this room, puts his hand on that machine, and signs a DNR for a woman whose medical proxy he no longer holds, it ceases to be a medical decision. It becomes attempted murder in the first degree. The snare was set. The tripwire was pulled taut across the doorway. Jax looked down at me, a wolfish, predatory grin spreading across his scarred face. "We hold the line until Friday, boss. Let him dig his own grave." I blinked once. A solid, definitive close of my eyes. Copy that. Come Friday, my husband was going to walk into this room expecting to execute a vegetable. He had no idea he was stepping into a federal kill box. I couldn't physically see what was happening at 9 a.m. on Friday inside Lucas's dingy strip mall law office in Hialeah, but the JAG officer later painted me a very vivid, very satisfying picture. David sat across a cheap laminate desk, grinning like a lottery winner. He gripped a pen and arrogantly forged my signature onto the deed of sale for my grandfather's Texas ranch. He thought that durable power of attorney was his impenetrable shield. Bing! The notification chimed on his brand new iPhone. $300,000. A corporate wire transfer from Texas had just dropped straight into his Florida bank account. David leaned back in his leather chair, exhaling a massive breath of relief. He thought he had outsmarted the Miami cartel. He thought he was a free man. He didn't know that the exact millisecond those digital funds crossed state lines, silent alarms tripped inside a federal database. Wire fraud. A massive, neon-flashing federal felony. The net didn't just drop. It pulled tight. At exactly 3 p.m., the heavy door to my hospital room whined open. Click-clack. Click-clack. David strode in. Through the narrow slit of my eyelashes, I saw he was wearing a crisp, jet-black Prada suit. Dressed for a funeral he was actively orchestrating. He carried a fresh manila folder, the DNR. Lucas stayed by the door, crossing his arms and acting as the lookout. A third man stood nervously by the wall, a sweaty civilian doctor whose bank account had just gotten a little heavier courtesy of my husband's new funds. "Is it ready?" David asked, his voice dripping with rehearsed, theatrical grief. The doctor nodded, wiping his brow with a tissue. "Just sign the final death certificate, Mr. Trent. I'll disconnect the ventilator. It'll be over in 3 minutes. Cardiac arrest." David stepped right up to my bed. He leaned down, bringing his face so close to mine I could see the dilated, greedy pupils of his eyes. "Don't blame me, Elena," he whispered, a vile, mocking smirk twisting his mouth. "You wouldn't want to live like a vegetable anyway. Thank you for the ranch and the insurance money. Don't worry, I'll live the good life for both of us." He stood up straight. With his left hand, he reached for the thick gray power cord of my ventilator. With his right hand, he clicked his Mont Blanc pen and pressed it against the medical clipboard. The exact fraction of a second the metal tip scratched the paper, I struck. My right hand, fueled by 72 hours of agonizing, bone-grinding physical therapy, with Clara shot up from the sheets. My fingers clamped around David's wrist like a titanium vice. The pen skidded off the clipboard. David froze. The breath hitched in his throat. His eyes darted down to my grip, then slowly, terrifyingly, crept up to my face. I didn't just flutter my eyelashes this time. I snapped my eyes wide open. I didn't give him the blank, glassy stare of a brain-dead victim. I locked onto him with the absolute, lethal crosshairs of a combat rescue officer. A muffled, ragged gasp tore through my oxygen mask. I forced my paralyzed vocal cords to obey me, weaponizing every ounce of air in my lungs. I didn't give you permission to kill me, David shrieked. It was a high-pitched, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated terror. He violently yanked his arm back, stumbling over his own expensive loafers. Crash! He slammed backward into the stainless steel medical tray, sending scalpels, syringes, and iodine shattering across the linoleum, before collapsing hard onto his back. She's alive, Luke. She's. Boom! The door didn't just open. It was kicked completely off its hinges. Federal agents. Nobody move. Master Sergeant Jax stormed into the room like an absolute juggernaut, flanked by 3 Air Force Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI agents, and 2 heavily armed Miami-Dade police officers. Glock 19s were drawn, laser sights cutting through the dim room, painting glowing red dots directly onto David and Lucas's chests. Lucas threw his hands in the air, pressing his back against the wall, whimpering like a beaten dog. The lead OSI agent stepped over the spilled iodine, towering over David, who was sobbing hysterically on the floor. David Trent and Lucas Trent, the agent barked, his voice echoing like thunder. You are under arrest for interstate wire fraud, forgery, and attempted murder in the first degree. Click-clack. Not Italian leather shoes this time. Handcuffs. The cold steel bit brutally into David's wrists. He looked up at me, completely drained of blood, sheer horror etched into every line of his face. He finally realized the power of attorney was a ghost. He was the one who had walked into a slaughterhouse. The federal justice system doesn't mess around, especially when you target an active-duty military officer. At the federal courthouse 3 months later, the hammer dropped with absolute, uncompromising steel. David caught 35 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. Lucas caught 20 years and was stripped of his law license forever. The rent-a-doc got 10 years and lost his medical board certification on the spot. But the true punishment for David wasn't the concrete box. It was the money. Because he used a revoked POA, the $300,000 wire transfer was instantly seized by the U.S. Treasury as criminal evidence. David went to prison absolutely, utterly broke. The Miami cartel he owed $500,000 to? They had guys inside that prison. David is going to spend the next 3.5 decades looking over his shoulder, jumping at every shadow, waiting for the day a sharpened toothbrush finds his ribs in the shower block. 1 year later, the automatic glass doors of the San Antonio Military Medical Center slid open, and the brutal, glorious Texas sun hit my face. I wasn't in a hospital gown anymore. I was wearing my Air Force Service dress blues. The silver pararescue flash and the airman's medal gleamed brilliantly on my chest. My right hand gripped a black tactical walking cane. The doctors had told me I'd never walk again. They clearly didn't know PJs. I took a deep breath of the hot, dry air. I squared my shoulders, keeping my spine ramrod straight. With Jax and Clara walking a few paces behind me, I stepped off the curb and walked out into the sunlight unbroken, untouchable, and completely reborn.